Hello, thank you for joining the 5-minute Bible study in the book of Colossians. Today we are in chapter 3 and we're going to be looking at verse 5. 5 starts a new section that goes to verse 11. So when you get a chance, go ahead and look in your Bibles at verses 5 through 11 to get the full context of what we're looking at today. Today we're looking at verse 5 and it says this: Therefore, consider the members of your earthly body as dead to immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed. So we see 5 things in the list here of negative behaviors, negative attitudes that Paul says that we need to consider ourselves dead to. But notice the first word in the verse, therefore. Therefore starts a new section. In other words, it's saying because of the things that happened before this, therefore the things that I'm talking about after this. So Paul's going to start this new section. What is the stuff before the therefore? Well, remember, back in chapter 1, we see who Jesus is and what he's done. Then in chapter 2, we see that again, but we also see what the false teachers are saying. And then at the beginning of chapter 3, we remember that Paul said it's all about Christ. Christ, 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 Christ. In other words, the false teachers were teaching that if you want to be justified, if you want to be made right in God's eyes, you have to do these certain things. But Paul's saying, if you want to be right in God's eyes, if you want to be justified, you need to receive Jesus, who's already done all these things for us. So if we want to be justified with God, we need to have died, been buried, and raised again with Jesus. And we saw that back in chapter 2 and chapter 3. And so that's what Paul's been telling us, that our justification is through faith in Jesus Christ and what he's done and who he is, and that nothing else we need to do can be added onto that to make us seem better in God's eyes. In fact, all we need to do to be justified, to be seen right in God's eyes, is receive the work of Christ. When we do that, when we truly do that, we are dead, buried, and raised again with Christ. So with that, because that's true, therefore, here's a list of things I want you to do. Now, recognize what he says. He says, consider the members of your earthly body as dead. Now, what is he talking about? It's not just our physical bodies. Certainly our physical bodies do sin. We sin. But he's talking about the entire person. It's our physical body. It's our spiritual body. It's our psychological and emotional person. It's our whole person, the whole person of us. We need to consider ourselves dead to these things. Why? Because we've already died with Christ. We're alive with Christ. So we should be dead to the things prior to Christ. And what are some of the things prior to Christ? Well, we see this list: immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, greed, which amounts to idolatry. And there's 6 things there, even though it's 5. But we see this list. Now, I'm not going to take the time to go through each one of these because we can do 5 minutes on each one. But recognize that this is a negative list. It's a list of negative behaviors and thoughts. Now, we're going to see another list right after this of more negative behaviors and thoughts. And then we're going to see a list of positive behaviors and thoughts. That would be really cool because now we can say we've got a list of things that we can do or not do and we'll be good. Well, it doesn't quite work like that because here's the reality. These lists exist throughout the New Testament. We see these lists in Romans, in 1 Corinthians, in Galatians, in 1 Timothy, in Titus, 1 Peter. The lists are everywhere. And so when we look at those lists and we compare the lists, we recognize the lists aren't all the same. Oh, no, now what do we do? Is the Bible contradicting itself? No, the Bible's not contradicting itself. In fact, these lists aren't talking about just these specific things. It's talking about behaviors in general. And so as we look at these lists, we can gather what proper behaviors are for a Christian. Now, does that mean that Paul's saying if we do these proper behaviors and don't do these proper behaviors, then we're justified in God's sight? We can then enter into heaven? No, because we've already been justified in God's sight because we received Jesus. Therefore, we are to do these things. This is called sanctification. Sanctification is different than justification. Sanctification means being more like Jesus, becoming more holy. Jesus is our role model. We follow what he does. What did Jesus do? And that's what we do when we are sanctified. We are becoming more like Christ. Does that justify us? Does that make us right in God's sight? Absolutely not. But if we are truly saved, we are sanctified. In fact, without sanctification, Jesus questions our justification. Paul does too. And they say, you need to examine yourselves, see if you're in the faith, right? Because otherwise, we need to work out our salvation. So what does that mean? That means salvation is really two parts. It's justification and sanctification. Paul said, because you've been justified, therefore be sanctified. And that's what this list is showing us, at least partially. And Paul's going to continue to show us what it looks like to be sanctified as we go through the rest of this letter. So with that, thank you for joining me for verse 5 today. Continue to join us as we move forward in the rest of this book. And if you have any questions on verse 5, go ahead and put those in the comment section below. Thoughts, questions, comments, whatever you like, put them in the comment section. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And until then, thank you very much for joining me, and have a wonderful day. God bless you.